very quickly, we're going to hear a letter that His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada wrote to Jawaharlal Nehru in 1952. Very interesting letter that has a lot of deep meaning for us today. So in this letter, His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami is answering to an article that Mr. Nehru wrote in the All India Congress. He's the president of the All India Congress Working Committee, and he wrote an article in a newspaper in the A.B. Patrika, Allahabad edition, that attracted the attention of Srila Prabhupada. And in that, Srila Prabhupada said, this article that Nehru wrote contains a nucleus of future activities of human society in the spiritual realm. And he says that I have read your statement about your deep thought on the onward march of human civilization. And Prabhupada quotes one part of the article where Nehru writes, so we search for new ways, new aspects of the truth, more in harmony with our environment, and we question each other and debate and quarrel and evolve any number of isms and philosophies. As in the days of Socrates, we live in an age of questioning, but the questioning is not confined to a city like Athens, it is worldwide. So Srila Prabhupada says, there are two ways of answering such questions. He says, let's see, the text has to be so they can read it, right? He says, there are two ways of answering such questions. He says, first of all, the deductive way, and then secondly, the inductive way. And Prabhupada says that the mortality of man is established by either of the above ways. So he's giving an example of two systems of knowledge. One is called the deductive system, and the other is called the inductive system. And we're going to discuss this now. And the question, the example is the mortality of man. So he says, if you accept from a reliable source that man is mortal, then you can say man is mortal, Nehru is a man, therefore Nehru is mortal. That's the deductive process. You deduct with your reasoning from a statement that is considered a truth. So someone tells you, Sonny, all men are mortal. You say, okay, I am mortal. I'm a man, therefore I am mortal. So you derive knowledge, or you deduce knowledge from that first statement. Now the second system of knowledge is called inductive. Okay, now ladies and gentlemen, we have to control the children for a little while. So the second system of knowledge is called inductive. And you use human reasoning after observation and experiment. So you observe a lot of things, and you experiment, you acquire a lot of information, and then you make some hypothesis based on those observations. That's called the scientific method. For example, Prabhupada says, Gandhi dies, Fotilal dies, C.R. Das dies, Patel dies, and therefore we conclude that man dies or man is mortal. So here we have two systems for acquiring knowledge. One is the deductive system, where you begin with a statement that's true and you deduce, or you derive some reasonable conclusions from that first true statement. And the other way is, you don't know exactly what is the truth or not, but you make a lot of observations and you do some experiments, and based on all that information, you draw some conclusion. And that conclusion, if it predicts the future reasonably well, it's considered a good theory. And if it predicts the future very well, it's considered scientific theory. But it's never 100% sure. One example is Newtonian physics. Newton was a very brilliant man, and he derived 3 laws of physics. Well, those laws of physics predict the movement of big bodies under the influence of gravity very well. Not perfectly, but very well. But when you go down to subatomic particles or atomic particles at the speed of light, Newtonian physics doesn't work. You have to come up with another theory to explain the movement. So within a certain framework of reference, Newtonian physics is generally good. Go enlarge the frame of reference, it breaks down. So you need a new theory. Okay, so Prabhupada says there's 2 ways of deriving knowledge. One is the inductive method, and one is the deductive method, and we just discussed both of them. However, he says, truth, when we're speaking about truth, because Nehru in his article is referring to finding the truth in new ways, he says the truth actually means absolute truth. It doesn't mean any other type of truth. But there's another type of truth called relative truth, and it's relative to certain conditions. And when the conditions fail, the truth is lost. It's not good. That's called relative truth. But absolute truth is truth all the time. It never fails. So Prabhupada says, so when we speak of truth, we may take it for absolute truth. And when we speak of approaching the truth by new ways, we may take it for granted what we want to approach, that you're trying to approach the truth by the inductive method. So when Nehru is talking in his article about searching the truth in new ways, he's not looking for the absolute truth. Okay, absolute truth is not something that you need new ways to search. It's already been established. It's never breaking down under any conditions. But when you want to find truth, new truth, you're talking about relative truth based on certain conditions. So you see how brilliant Prabhupada is. He first of all, he gives a philosophical background of 2 systems of knowledge, 2 ways of approaching knowledge, deductive and inductive. And then he says truth means the absolute truth, and anything else is relative truth that's conditional, that depends on certain conditions. And when the conditions fail, that truth is no longer valid. Just like 2 people get married and they say, Pyar, I love you. And the other person says, Pyar, I love you. Then after 10 years, one says, I hate you, and the other one says, I hate you. So that relative truth of I love you was based on certain conditions. When the conditions changed, it broke down. It's no longer truth. That's relative truth. Absolute truth is always true. And we have examples of that. Like, for example, Krishna says, Konteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranasyati. In the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he says that I will always protect my devotee. Now, is this true or not true? Is it conditional or is it unconditional? It's unconditional. Look at what happened to Arjuna. He was protected unconditionally by Krishna. Arjuna was destined to lose the battle of Kurukshetra. He could not defeat Dronacharya. He could not defeat Bhisma Pitama. Even his brother Karna he could not defeat. But yet, Krishna says, Konteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranasyati. My devotee will never perish. So, even though the Pandavas were vastly outnumbered, and there were greater warriors on the side of the Kurus, still they won, because Krishna was on their side. And Krishna maintains that promise. So that's an absolute truth. Also Krishna says, Tesam nitya biyuktanam yogashemam vahamyaham. A person who dedicates his life to me, who worships me with undivided attention, I provide what he lacks and preserve what he has. Now that's a good promise. Provide what you lack and preserve what you have. You can't lose that way. That's better than CD. CDs are guaranteed only up to $100,000. This is Unlimited guarantee. You see? Tesam nitya biyuktanam yogushimam bahamyaham. So these are absolute truths that you can test. You can put them to the test. If you always serve Krishna, and you're always dedicated to Krishna with love and devotion, Krishna promises you that He will protect you. And Krishna promises you that He'll provide you with what you lack and preserve what you have. Not only that, Krishna makes other promises. He says, Manmana bhava mad bhakto, mad yaji mam namaskuru, mam evaisasi satyam te pratijane priyosime. This is another promise. Now, this is the third promise he makes in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Manmana bhava mad bhakto. If you think of me always, and become my devotee, and offer your, worship me, and offer all your respect and love to me, then 100% sure, birkul, you will come back to me. 100%. So this is a third promise he makes. Then another promise he makes. Daivihi esa gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mam evaye prapadyante maya metam tarantite. He says, it's impossible for you to overcome the influence of Maya. Because it's Mama Maya, he says. It's my Maya. It's my energy. So on your own, you cannot overcome it. But if you surrender to me, it's easy to overcome. Fourth promise. Actually, he makes many promises in Bhagavad Gita, and he keeps all of them. Only trouble is we don't believe it. That's the only trouble. We believe Obama, but we don't believe Krishna. That's our tragedy. That's our problem. So now, Prabhupada is writing to Nehru. He says, the absolute truth is described in the Vedas as Satyam Param Dhimahi, the greatest truth, the greatest good, summum bonum. And from this absolute truth, Prabhupada says, everything emanates. Okay, we have to control the children. Krishna says, Janmadasya yata, everything comes from me. So, this absolute truth is described in the Vedic literatures as sanatana, or eternal. It's not conditional. It doesn't depend on anything. It's all absolute. And the philosophy or science which deals with such eternal subjects is described as Sanatana Dharma. Now, this Sanatana Dharma has been existing eternally. But Nehru is saying we got to find new ways, new truths. You see? In other words, we have to reinvent the wheel. But the wheel was already invented. The wheel was already perfected. Why do we have to reinvent it? That's very interesting. We want to try and reinvent it so that we take credit for it, not Krishna. You see? You see, there's enviousness involved here. If we accept what Krishna has said, that means he gets the credit. But if we say, let's throw that out the window and reinvent the wheel, we get the credit. Okay. So, therefore, Prabhupada says, we have first to find out the eternal absolute truth by some new ways, and then we have to find out the new aspects of absolute truth in harmony with our environment. These are Nehru's statements. It sounds nice, but it's nasty. There are many things in life that look good, sound nice, but actually they're nasty. Just like beer. Beer looks good. Advertisements on the television, it looks very good. It looks shiny, and it looks cold and refreshing. People drink it like this, or Coca-Cola also. They drink it like this. But beer, if you drink it warm, it tastes like urine. I'm not kidding you. Of course, you can try if you want. But if you cool it and make it nice and cold and add a little fizziness to it, add a little carbonated water to it, it tastes almost good. You see. We could actually do a test. Let's put some urine in a bottle and put some carbonated water in it and cool it. and compare the taste of urine to beer. I bet it's very close. So, why do we have to invent some new truth when we already have the truth? Sanatan Dharma. Right? People have been practicing Sanatan Dharma. That's why India is still there. That's why there's over 1 billion people in India. They've been practicing Sanatan Dharma. Right? They didn't practice Michael Jackson or Madonna or Lady Gaga. They practiced Sanatan Dharma. You see? Therefore, everything worked for thousands, millions of years actually. So the present environment is undoubtedly different from the old environment. And if we compare the present with the old, we can very easily discover that, one, people in the present age are generally short-living. The average duration of life is between 30 years or so. Now, why does Prabhupada say this? Because, let's say the normal lifespan now is what, 60, 66? Country to country difference. City to city difference. Neighborhood to neighborhood difference, right? Yeah, person. So let's say it's 60 years old. Now, why does Prabhupada say 30? Because half the time we're sleeping. Half of the life we lose sleeping, eating, and all those other good things that we do. You see? How much of our life do we actually live with full consciousness? If you live 60 years, it's not more than 30 years. That's why he says 30 years. You see? Okay. Number two, the people are generally not very simple. Almost every man is designing and crooked. Yeah, we make things complicated. Just like read a sale contract. You need someone to interpret it. You can't understand the words, right? Huh? You need a lawyer. It's impossible to understand. You read it, it's English, but it's not English. It's some foreign language, right? You have to hire someone to read it to you, to explain it to you. Or you get a lease contract. Or you buy a car and they give you a service guarantee. Those are the most complicated, cheating documents in the world. It's impossible to understand it. Or you buy life insurance, or you buy car insurance. Any of these things, it's not English, it's legalese. It's not English, it's legalese. It's impossible to understand. And then when something goes wrong, your insurance agent said, "Oh, excuse me, Mr. So-and-so, you didn't read the fine print. This thing that happened to you is not covered." And you look at it, where is that? And you look at it, it's, oh my God. He said, "I signed that?" He said, "Yes." You see? So people are being cheated every day. Life is very complicated nowadays. I remember after I got married, I was trying to get my wife to come to the United States. She was born in Switzerland. She was not American. My God, it took me 2 years to do all the paperwork, all the medical exams. I told my wife, "Why don't you just go across the Rio Grande?" Rio Grande is the border between the United States and Mexico. I said, just go to Mexico City, take a bus up to Rio Grande, and then just walk across the river. You don't have to follow any rules. And then 10 years later, Obama had changed the rules. You become a citizen. She said, no, I don't want to, I can't swim yet. I said, you don't have to swim. There's hardly any water in the river. You just walk across. Anyway. So number 3, they have no scope for high thinking because they are perplexed with different relative truths. This is our dilemma. We have no scope for high thinking because there are many relative truths. Like one relative truth, people say, we all come from monkeys. And you believe you come from, you have a monkey in your family? I don't have any monkey in my family. Anybody have a monkey in their family? No, Hanumanji is half monkey, half human. He's the son, ultimately, of Shiva and Parvati through Vayu. But He's not a normal monkey. I'm talking about the monkeys you see in the zoo. Anybody have a monkey relative in the zoo? No, we don't come from monkeys. That's nonsense. Or life is better on the moon. Stephen Hawking is saying, we can't live here anymore. The environment is ruined. We have to go to the moon. Who's first? Who's going to go first? Who volunteers to go first? Just like they asked for volunteers to go to Mars. You know how many people volunteered? And by the way, it's only a one-way ticket. You know how many people volunteered? 77,000 people. Recently, the last 6 months, they got 77 applications for a one-way ticket to Mars. That means you're dead. You see? So these are all crazy concepts, but there are a lot of crazy people in this world willing to take a one-way ticket to Mars. Now, this is the question. Are we interested in making money at the expense of others, or are we interested in the truth that benefits everyone? That's the point. If we're only interested in making money at the expense of others, then you can speak any nonsense, and you'll always find someone that will agree with you. You always find someone that will agree with you. If you smoke enough marijuana, you agree to anything. But we want the truth that benefits everyone. So the scope for high thinking is obfuscated, as they say, or confused by many relative truths. Next, unfortunate as the people are in this age, their problems remain unsolved for the whole life, even though they are tackled by their leaders. In other words, what he means by tackled, even though their leaders make many, many promises. We have a 5-year program, we're going to wipe out poverty. We have a 5-year program, no more hunger. We have a 5-year program, no more war. But after 5 years, hunger problem is still there, poverty is still there, war is still there. Now they make a new 5-year plan, and they get more money for it. They make the best effort to solve a problem, but unfortunately the same problem becomes more acute and stringent. Just like we have the United Nations since 1947. 1946. Have wars ended in the world? No. Has the United Nations ever stopped a war? No. It's like the police in Chicago. Someone's choking your wife, you call the police. Please come right away. After your wife is dead and the criminal goes away, they come. They say, what happened? So what do you mean, what happened? I called you. The man was choking my wife. I know. Where is she? She's here. She's dead. I mean, where's the criminal? I don't know. Why don't you find him? Okay, fill out a report, and we'll put it with the other stack of 10,000 reports we have. Every weekend in Chicago, it's not Chicago, it's Baghdad. 14 murders, 36 people wounded. This is the United States, right? So, you call the police in certain places, they come after everything is over. I think that happens in Bihar and India also. Okay. Above all, people in this age are always distressed by famine, scarcity, griefs, and diseases in an increasing ratio. So, if you open up the yellow pages and look up phone numbers of businesses, the most pages are the doctors and lawyers. Page after page, hundreds, thousands of doctors and lawyers in every city in the United States. Why is that? Number one, people are sick, and number two, people are fighting. So, this is increasing, it's not decreasing. As soon as they find the cure for one sickness, there are 10 new sicknesses that they have to deal with. In the old days, life was not so much conditional and encumbered. The simple problems were then the problems of bread, clothing, and shelter, which were solved by the simplest process. By agriculture, they used to solve the bread, clothing and shelter problems, and industrialization was unknown to them. Thus, they had no idea of living in big palatial buildings at the cost of sacrificing the boon of humanity. The boon of humanity, or let's say, the blessing of humanity, is that with the human body and human intelligence, you can understand your relationship with God. You can't understand your relationship with God as a dog or a cat or a snake or a bear or a tree. But with the human body, you can. But if we waste the potential of the human body simply eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and then dying, the 5 activities of animals, we waste this great blessing. What's the difference between a man who eats, sleeps, mates, defends, and dies, and an animal who eats, sleeps, mates, and dies? There's no difference. The only difference is if a human being tries to have Atma Tattva, understand the truth of the eternal soul and the relationship of our eternal soul with Paramatma, Atma Tattva and Paramatma Tattva. That's the blessing of human life. So they were satisfied to live in cottages, and yet they were perfectly intelligent. Even the famous Chanakya Pandit, who was the prime minister of India during the reign of Chandragupta, used to live in a cottage and draw no salary from the state. Why? Because a Brahmin never works for anyone. I once met a man, and I said, "Where you come from?" He said, "I come from Mathura." Oh, I said, "That's where Krishna appeared." He said, "Yes, and I'm a Brahmin." And he went like this. Now, this is called a 2 paisa Brahmin, because this string only costs 2 paisa in India, right? Now, if I have the 2 paisa string, but I asked him, by the way, when I was talking to him, he was drinking wine. And when I asked him what you do, he said, "Well, I work in IT for a company." Now, that person cannot be a Brahmin, because Brahmins never work for anyone. They're independent. Like Chanakya Pandit, although he was the personal advisor of Chandragupta, he never took 1 paisa from him. Why? Because if he takes money from him, he can't speak the truth. If he says something that's truthful and Chandragupta doesn't like it, he said, "You're fired." Right? He can't fire him if he's independent. So Brahmins never work for anyone. They earn their living, if you'd call it earning, by either doing puja or teaching how to do puja. Teaching Vedic philosophy, or practicing the Vedic philosophy, right? And only in these ways. They never are employed by anyone. Okay. Or they beg. Like Chanakya Pandit used to beg. And if people didn't give him anything, he and his wife would fast. But he was independent. But yet, he was the smartest man in the world. Because of him, Chandragupta was able to defeat Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was not able to conquer India. He conquered Western places, even up to modern Pakistan, but he was not able to conquer India because Chanakya Pandit advised Chandragupta how to outsmart Alexander and defeat him. That's how brilliant he was. But yet, he never took any salary. He used to live in a cottage and draw no salary from the state. Such simple habits did not deteriorate his high intelligence and dignity, and as such, he had compiled many useful literatures which are still read by millions for social and political guidance. The Chanakya Niti Shastra is full of practical knowledge, how to avoid bad people, how to associate with good people, how to recognize who's good, how to recognize who's bad, and so forth. These are the main questions in life. Just like every young girl should be taught Chanakya Niti. Why? Because when it's time for her to say yes to get married, if she doesn't understand Chanakya Niti, she might say yes to getting married to a demon. You see? Oftentimes, people tell me, when I got married, I was so sure that my husband was like Ram. But after 3 months, I became convinced that he was exactly like Ravan. Now, unfortunate, isn't it? It's better to be trained ahead of time rather than sorry later. This is Chanakya Niti. That's how brilliant Chanakya Pandit is. Of course, nobody reads anymore. They all read different books, how to make more money through real estate. This is their interest nowadays. But before, Chanakya Niti or Tirukural was taught in the schools. With Tirukural, the same as Chanakya Niti, you learn how to recognize good and bad, how to avoid putting yourself in compromising situations, so many good things. Thus, the simplicity of Brahminical culture was an ideal to the subordinate others of the society, and in the deductive way, the subordinate orders, namely the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Sudras, would follow the instruction of the cultured Brahmin. So this is exactly what used to be the system of education in India. People would study Bhagavad Gita. People would study Srimad Bhagavatam. People would study Chanakya Niti Shastra. People would study Tirukural. And they would accept their statements. They didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And they would use those statements just like in all the cultures. Like in my culture, it's the same thing. We were taught when we were kids proverbs. Proverbs from our forefathers who had gone through history, thousands of years, and came up with these proverbs. Just like my father told me, he who wants little will discover a lot in life. Now this is a good proverb. He who wants little will discover a lot. But he who wants a lot will become frustrated. You see? And then my father taught me also, during your prosperous days, live frugally, so that during your frugal days, you can live prosperously. Now, this is very good advice. And I followed it. When I was doing very well financially, I lived like a brahmachari. And now, when I'm not doing so well financially, I'm living like a Raja. I took my father's advice. You see? Now, this is wisdom coming from our forefathers who already experimented, who made all the mistakes. Why do we have to make the same mistakes today? They already made the mistake, and they're passing it down through history. You see? So, Chanakya Pandit, Tirukural, Krishna. Who can give better advice than Krishna in Bhagavad Gita? And all the great saints, Sukadeva Goswami, and other great saints, Maitreya Muni, have given all this tremendous wisdom in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Why should we ignore that and read how to make more money through real estate? Or how to make money on the commodities market? They're all nonsense subjects. Such ways of approaching the truth is always simple, plain, and perhaps the most perfect. The cultured Brahmin order of the society would declare that there is God or Brahman, and the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and the Sudras, who were less cultured than the Brahmins, would follow the latter faithfully, call it blindly or otherwise. By such faithfully following, the subordinate classes would be able to save much time in the matter of arguing and reasoning for the existence of God at all, and still they would not be called faithless. In the old days, even a politician Brahmin like Chanakya would say that vidvatam cha ripatam cha naiva tulyaya kadachana. Swadesh pujyate raja vidvar sarvata pujyato. This is one of Chanakya Niti Shastra verses. A really cultured, learned person is far above a politician, because a politician is honored by the votes of his countrymen, while a cultured and learned fellow is honored everywhere all over the world. So this verse, he didn't translate it, it means a really cultured person looks at every woman like his mother except for his wife, and looks at other people's wealth like pebbles in the street, and thinks of himself as the humble servant, not as the master. This is culture. Nowadays, people look, just like I did a marriage recently, and part of the Saptapada, the 7 vows, one of the vows is, the husband says, I will look at every other woman like my mother, except for my wife. And the wife says, and I will look at every man like my father, except for my husband. So when I asked the groom to repeat this, he started going like this, and I will look at it, oh no, I'm not going to do this. You see, the problem today, there's no culture anymore. There's Chanakya Pandit's teaching culture. So he says, a really cultured person is not localized in some neighborhood or some family or some ethnicity. When they speak the truth, that's a universal truth. It's not a conditional truth. It's not relative truth. So we say that Rabindranath and Gandhi were never dependent for the votes of their countrymen, but they were honored all over the world for their cultural contribution. The same Chanakya Pandit defined the standard of learning that had to be testified by its result and not by the manner of university. So someone can get a PhD just like the Unabomber. Unabomber was a PhD, but he used his knowledge to kill people. So what good is that? Just because someone has knowledge, just like Ravana had so much knowledge, and he taught that knowledge to his son Indrajit. Indrajit was doing puja to kill Ram. Is that the purpose of puja? He was doing puja to kill Ram, not to help humanity. So, he said that one who looks upon all women except one's married wife as mothers, all others' wealth as the pebbles on the street, and all living being as one's own self, is really a learned fellow. He never stressed on how many grammars, rhetorics, or the books of knowledge one might have gone through, or how many doctorates of different universities one might have been decorated with. At the present moment, we know very well that few men look upon other women besides one's married wife as mothers. Very few men will look upon others' wealth as pebbles on the street, and very few men will try to behave with other living beings as one wants to be treated oneself. The sages of old age discovered it by spiritual culture that man's energy should be utilized only for spiritual realization. Not to speak of Lord Sri Krishna, who spoke the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita near about 5,000 years ago, we know that within 2,000 years of human history, no sages, including Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, Lord Buddha, Acharya Sankara, Madhvacharya, Ramanuja, or even Lord Chaitanya gave any importance to materialistic way of life. Material necessities were always subordinate to the spiritual realization. They saw it that the bread problem, clothing problem, and shelter problem was never solved by material activities, because in the law of nature, the elephant is given the whole jungle to eat, and the little ant is given a grain of sugar to solve their respective bread problems, and yet the animals remain hungry. Yes, today in the United States, the richest country in the world, you go in the Safeway, it's full of food. The Safeway, the Fred Meyer, the top grocery, this place, that place, it's full of food, and yet there are people starving in the streets. How is this possible? You see? So, Krishna gives the whole jungle to the elephant, still the elephant can't eat enough. It is not a question of a jungle or a grain of sugar that can solve our bread problem, but is the question of real food that can quench the hunger of the human being and revitalize him to proper life. Human being, therefore, should not be encouraged to satisfy his unsatiated hunger like the giant elephant or the little ant, but he should be trained up. Otherwise, which shall provide for his real food. Now, real food means the spiritual knowledge, Atma Tattva, Paramatma Tattva, Bhakti. This is real food. This can satisfy the soul of a human being. Otherwise, we'll never be able to eat enough material food. We'll never be able to sleep enough. Nowadays, people have to take sleeping pills. You know, 76% of Americans are taking some kind of psychotropic drug because of stress. Either they can't sleep, or they're worried, or they have anxiety attack. 76% of the people in this country. That's why the pharmaceutical companies are doing fantastic. Right? And the beer companies. And now the marijuana companies, they're going to do great. It reduces stress. Medical marijuana. The wonderful temples, the mosques, and the cathedrals of past centuries were built up to give people the real food, and were not built up by the blind or unquestioning faith. They were built up on full faith and reasoning, which were based on the deductive process. The Vedas, the Bible, or the Quran would ask the human being to make proper use of his conserved energy in the transcendental service of God, and unsophisticated men in the old days would follow such instruction unhesitatingly for realizing absolute truth. Such temples, mosques, were therefore centers of high culture to provide real food to human consciousness. But in the present age, in the absence of such high culture, there is hardly any difference between the temples, the mosques, and the cathedrals, and the high commercial buildings in a busy city. In other words, they've all become business-oriented. The bottom line is death, but people think it's money. If the culture is to be revived, it is quite possible to do it even in your parliamentary buildings in New Delhi or in the commercial buildings of New York, as the Socratesian ways of reasoning is not bound up within the walls of Athens, so also the Brahminical culture is not bound up within the walls of India. You can find out the 9 prescribed qualifications of a Brahmin, the 7 qualifications of Kshatriyas, and the 3 qualifications of Vaishyas, and the 1 qualification of Sudra worldwide. So I'm an example. Prabhupada came to America to preach Krishna consciousness. He didn't say, oh, there are no Brahmins in America. They're all Chandalas. We'll have to wait till they take birth in India, and then in a family of a Brahmana to make them Krishna conscious. No. He's following what he says here. That there are real Brahmanas, there are real Kshatriyas, there are real Vaishyas, there are real Sudras all over the world. They're not just in India. And you can go anywhere in the world and train people to come up to the level of Brahmana, or Vaishya, or Sudra, or whatever. So that's what we're doing here. This is what we're trying to train people here. We have our courses, we have our training in deity worship, we have our different classes and chanting and service opportunities. Why? To train people to come up to the Brahminical level. Samadhamma tapak socham santir arjavam evacha jnanam vijnanam sahitam gyatva yajgyatva santim richati. In other words, Brahmakarma smabhavajam. These are the 8 qualities of Brahmins, 9 qualities. Sama, equilibrium of the mind. They're not elated when there's happiness. They're not dejected when there's suffering. Dhamma, they're self-controlled. They have control of the senses. Vachavegam, manasakrodavegam, jiva vegam, udaratasta vegam, etan vegam, yo vishaheta tirak, sarvam apimam pritivim sasyat. People who can control the words, who can control the mind, who can control anger, who can control the tongue, who can control the stomach, who can control the genital, they're qualified to go anywhere in the world and teach Krishna consciousness and not become bewildered by Maya. These are the Brahminical qualifications. And anyone can be trained up if they're willing to submit themselves to a bona fide spiritual authority for that training. And that's what we're doing here. Okay, Prabhu, let me hear from you. 8 years ago, were you eating meat? What? Yes. Were you drinking wine? Yes. Were you a Hindu? Okay. What happened to you? Say it. Here, take the microphone, sir.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji.
Did you have a wine cellar?
Yes.
Were there expensive bottles?
Yes, very expensive. Yeah, I had a lot of single malt collection of whiskeys, which each bottle used to cost $200.
$200.
Yeah.
What happened? Did you get brainwashed by the Hare Krishnas or what? What happened?
No. So I started coming to this temple in 2004, and I didn't understand a lot of things in the beginning, but one thing I liked very much, the prasadam. Every Sunday evening I used to come and then serve prasadam and then eat prasadam and go. After a few weeks, so one day I got a Bhagavad Gita book. So then I tried to understand this Bhagavad Gita. So some of them I could understand, some of them I could not understand. Then I asked some devotees. Can you help me to understand this? They said, no problem, come to our class. So then I started going to the class and started associating with the devotees, started understanding Sunday classes. I started coming on Sunday classes. And then every week, 3 classes I used to attend, Thursday, Friday and Sunday. So that helped me, and then I studied later Bhagavad Gita systematically. When I started doing this, automatically I started developing taste for chanting and dancing, fasting and feasting. So then automatically all those things, all my desires to drink and eat more ghee, all went away. And then one day I took all this bottle and threw it in the lake.
Those expensive bottles?
Yes.
$200 a bottle?
Yes.
What part of the lake did you throw?
So it naturally happened, no brainwashing, nothing. So.
You got a higher taste.
Yes, and my family is happy, I'm happy. And we are also trying to do the same thing to others now, share this happiness with others.
Is that a true, are you a plant here? Did I plant you here today to say this? No. It's a true story, right? Now, how many more people you think I could ask right now in this audience to tell that story? At least 50 people. That's true. That's what we're doing here. We're doing exactly what Prabhupada says. We're training people to become Brahminically qualified. Doesn't matter where you were born, doesn't matter your family, doesn't matter your education. If you're willing to submit to training, we give the training. And you'll be liberated from bad habits and bad company. You can therefore pick up Brahmins and other orders of society all over the world. So I'm an example. Prabhupada picked me up from the dirt of material life and taught me how to chant Hare Krishna. And I'm still chanting 46 years later. Gandhiji, although born in a Vaishya family, possessed almost all the 9 qualifications of a Brahmin. And if possible, we could find out such Brahmins in other parts of the world. One Brahmin Gandhi, congressman, is quite competent to guide its principles, whereas thousands of Sudra congressmen, like Nehru, can only help to break it up into pieces. You see? See how Prabhupada is 1952, he's writing the Nehru. Thus, if we want to approach the Absolute Truth in new ways, in harmony with the present environment, we should try to be true to one another in a qualified way of Brahminical culture. Only a dozen of real qualified Brahmins from all parts of the world should combine to guide the principles of the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Sudras all over the world. The Socratesian way of reasoning should be fully utilized because that makes the only difference between a human being and a beast. So Socrates was teaching people by asking them questions to see if they know a subject. And by asking enough questions, the person would admit, I don't really know. I don't know what morality is. I don't know what God is. I don't know this. And then together, they would continue researching until they found out. So this being able to ask the right questions is very important. That's the Socratesian method. There is ample scope for this new way of approaching absolute truth. In other words, you don't have to just accept anymore what someone says. Everyone's being taught nowadays, don't just accept anything. Question. Okay, but there's a way of questioning based on the Vedic Shruti to arrive at the absolute truth. Whether Socrates did it in Greece, but already the great acharyas of India have done it. The whole question and answer of the Bhagavad Gita is an example. Arjuna asks Krishna hundreds of questions, and he answers them all categorically with reason and logic and bona fide Vedic statements. And Arjuna becomes pure devotee of Krishna. So it can happen today, not based on dogmatic statements, but based on reason and logic, properly guided according to Vedic process. There is ample scope for this new way of approaching the absolute truth that will only solve the acute, distressing world problems. If there is scarcity of such qualified Brahmins, which I honestly think there is, we should combine to evolve such Brahminical culture, not by blind faith, but by sound reasoning and questioning. But all the same, we must be sincere and thorough in our attempt. As a humble disciple of Om Vishnupad Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami, that's Prabhupada's guru, I wish to remain always true to you, dear Nehru, and everyone. And if you sincerely be true to your forefathers, I mean the Brahminical culture, you will have the strength and the capacity to save the world by presenting the Brahminical culture once again for consummation of the distressed world. In such acts of your boldness of mind, I am always at your service. So, what a wonderful letter he wrote to Nehru in 1952, basically saying, look, the solution is not political or military or social or economic. The solution is, let's go back to our forefathers. Chanakya Pandit, Maitreya Muni, Sukadev Goswami, Vyasadev, Narada Muni, and they presented the Brahminical culture and raised people up. This is the solution. And that same solution is valid today. That's what we're actually seeing today in our temples. This is not a money-making machine. This is not a Walmart here. This is Hare Krishna temple for elevating people to the Brahminical standards. Hare Krishna. So we'll stop right there. We'll have a party. And of course, Mahaprasad.